The morning after our wedding, I was jolted awake by the doorbell. The second I opened the door, my mother's hand cracked across my face. "You ungrateful brat. Getting married without even telling us?" she shrieked. "Your brother isn't even married yet. How dare you? Get divorced right now and let your brother have her." I tried to reason with them, begging them to leave. "It'll be trouble if my wife sees you." The words had barely left my mouth when I heard her. I clutched my stinging cheek, praying they would just go, that Sarah wouldn't see this. But her familiar, cool fragrance was already drifting down the hallway. Serafina Vance appeared, wearing nothing but one of my white button-down shirts, the hem falling just high enough to skim her thighs. She was barefoot, moving across the floor with the silent grace of a predator. Her eyes landed on the red handprint blooming on my cheek. "Who hit you?" Her voice was as soft as a whisper, but it was laced with ice. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My mother jutted out her chin, sneering. "So, you're the wife? You think you can just waltz into my family without my approval?" The way Sarah looked at my mother shifted. "Was it you who hit my darling?" My mother scoffed, completely oblivious to the danger. "What? First day as a daughter-in-law, and you're already trying to pull rank on me. Let me tell you something. He's my son first, and your husband second. It's a mother's right to discipline her own child." The next sound was a crack, even louder than the first. My mother's head snapped to the side, 5 red welts instantly appearing on her cheek. Serafina casually shook her wrist, a gentle, curving smile on her lips. "You're right," she said sweetly, "and it's a wife's right to discipline her mother-in-law. Turnabout is fair play." Time seemed to stop. My brother's eyes were wide with disbelief. My mother cupped her face, her pupils constricting in shock. Before she could even process it, Sarah grabbed her by the throat, and the slaps came down like a torrential rainstorm. "The day I married Ethan, I made a vow," Sarah said between strikes. "If anyone ever dared to hurt him, I would pay it back tenfold." She didn't stop until the 10th slap. When she finally let go, my mother's mouth and face were smeared with blood. "Mom!" my brother Kevin screamed, rushing to her side. He shot me a venomous look. "Ethan, you worthless piece of trash. How could you let her hit Mom? Get your woman under control," he yelled. "There's no way we're letting a woman like this marry into our family." Sarah, however, was the picture of calm. She made a dismissive gesture. "Get out," she said, her voice still soft. My mother's lips trembled. As she started to speak, Sarah added another quiet sentence. "If I ever see either of you lay a finger on him again, I will cut off your hands." She turned back to me, her expression softening instantly. Her fingertips traced the burning skin of my cheek as she whispered, like cooing to a child, "Does it hurt, honey?" I shook my head, but I could hear my own heart pounding out of control. It was over. She was furious. Once her obsessive love was ignited, it never burned out. As if making a solemn declaration, she said, "From the day we were married, I am the only family Ethan has in this world. If you bother us again, don't expect me to be polite." "Bullshit. He's my flesh and blood." My mother spat a fleck of bloody saliva onto my face, her voice like a broken gong. "As long as I'm breathing, you'll never be a part of this family." Just as I expected, hearing that, a cold, murderous intent filled Sarah's eyes. My brother, Kevin, seized the opportunity to grab me by the collar. "Let's go. To the county clerk. If you don't sign the divorce papers today, I'll hold your damn head to the counter until you do." Serafina didn't say a word. She simply bent down and smoothed the wrinkles on my collar. Her fingernails were still stained with my mother's blood, a stark contrast to the snow-white cuffs of her shirt. "Ethan," she murmured, her voice a soothing hum. "Do you have your ID and birth certificate?" I nodded. "Good." She looked up, the warmth in her eyes instantly freezing over. "No one is taking you anywhere." The words had barely settled when my brother was suddenly lifted off the ground. Sarah had him by the wrist with one hand. With a sharp, reverse twist, a sickening crack echoed in the room, like snapping a celery stalk. Before Kevin could even scream, the toe of her shoe tapped the back of his knee, and he collapsed, kneeling at my feet. "You want to drag my husband off to get a divorce?" Sarah leaned in, her long hair brushing against his face, which was contorted in agony. "Fine, you can step over my dead body first." My mother, her eyes red with fury, grabbed a ceramic vase from the entryway table and charged. "You witch! I'll kill you." I instinctively moved to shield Sarah, but she pushed me back to a safe distance with one hand. The vase stopped an inch from her forehead. She had caught it between 2 fingers as effortlessly as plucking a flower. With a smooth turn of her wrist, she brought the base of the vase down hard against my mother's chest. A dull thud, like a worn-out bellows being stomped on, escaped my mother's lungs. She staggered backward, crashing into the shoe rack. Biologically speaking, you are his mother, Sarah said, placing the vase back on the table with the gentle care of an artist arranging flowers. But legally speaking, his marriage certificate says his spouse is me, Serafina Vance. She took out a wet wipe and began cleaning her fingertips. Do I need to remind you how many years you can get for robbery, assault, and unlawful imprisonment? I couldn't help but think that the old Sarah would have already beaten them half to death. Now that we were married, she was showing some restraint, even, surprisingly, bringing up the law. My mother's face went from purple to pale, but she still tried to sound tough. You little bastard. You think the law scares me? I'm his mother. Even if I beat him to death, no one would dare arrest me. Oh, so I smiled. She pulled out her phone and turned the screen toward them. On the high-definition recording, my mother was swinging the vase, my brother was twisting my arm. Every single action captured in perfect, damning detail. Already uploaded to the cloud, she said softly. If I don't enter the password within 30 minutes, the video will be automatically sent to the local police department, Child Protective Services, and the 3 law firms I have on retainer. The air was sucked out of the room. A bead of cold sweat dripped from my brother's chin onto the floor, mixing with the shattered fragments of my mother's pride. Her lips quivered, but no curses came out, only a hoarse, wheezing sound. Sarah put her phone away and knelt to look me in the eyes. Ethan, she said, cupping my still hot cheek, her voice as soft as cotton candy again. Go to the bedroom. Get our marriage certificate, your birth certificate, and your ID. Where are we going? My throat was dry. The hospital. She kissed my earlobe. To get your injuries documented for a medical report. And then, she glanced over my mother with a radiant smile. We're suing her for felony assault. My mother finally broke, throwing herself at my legs. Ethan, are you really going to watch your own mother go to jail? I gave birth to you. I looked down at her graying hair, matted to her forehead with blood, and my heart felt like it was being sawed apart by a dull blade. But Sarah's hand found mine first, her fingers lacing through mine. Her palm was so hot, it was almost scorching. Ethan, she whispered into my ear, so low only I could hear. You feel sorry for her, but who's ever felt sorry for you? From the day you were born, she's only ever had eyes for your brother. Are you really still holding out hope for her? It would be a lie to say I didn't. But as I thought about the woman who stood by me, who would shield me from the world, I realized something. Sarah was the only one worth protecting. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and opened them again. Mom, I said, bending down and pried her fingers off me one by one. The door to the examination room clicked shut. The doctor's words, perforated right eardrum and multiple soft tissue contusions, were still ringing in my ears. I leaned against the wall and pulled a manila envelope from my bag. Inside was the declaration of severance I had printed out last week. Sarah had gone to get me a hot chocolate, say my hands were ice cold and needed some warmth. I stared at the tips of my shoes, and then I heard my own hoarse voice echo in the empty hallway. This isn't the first time you've hit me, Mom. When I was 8, I got first place in my grade. You crumpled up my award certificate and stuffed it in the furnace, saying, there's no point for the older one to study so much. He should just get a job and start saving up to help Kevin get on his feet. When I was 12, I had a fever of 104. You took Kevin into town for corn dogs and left me in bed to tough it out. When I was 16, I got an acceptance letter to the best magnet school in the city. You took Kevin shopping for new Nikes that night and hid my tuition money, saying his sports were more important. On my 18th birthday, I worked for half a year to buy myself a $20 cake. The first thing you said when you got home was, Kevin wants that new video game. Give him the money. Then you threw my cake in the trash right in front of me. My mother sat on the bench across from me. The blood dried at the corner of her mouth. She looked like she wanted to interrupt, a rattling sound coming from her throat, but the moment I met her gaze, she froze. It was probably the first time I had ever looked at her like a complete stranger. You always say I'm your flesh and blood. I paused, pulling out the final sheet. But flesh can rot, and when it rots, you have to cut it away. The top of the page had 4 words in bold, black letters. Voluntary Declaration of Severance. At the bottom was my signature, already signed. The date written next to it was the day Sarah and I got our marriage license. I held it out to her, along with a pen. Sign this. Add your thumbprint. And from now on, your life and my death will have nothing to do with each other. If Kevin needs a new house, you can sell your own blood. If you need money in your old age, you can sue me. I'll pay whatever the court decides. But don't ever expect me to call you Mom again. My mother's lips trembled. She shot her head up to look at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine terror in her eyes. She must have finally understood. The little boy who once knelt on the ground begging her not to leave, who cried while chasing her pickup truck down the road, had been killed, stabbed to death one cut at a time by her own hand. Ethan. She called me by my childhood nickname, her voice like rusted iron scraping against glass. I stood up as a warm cup was placed in my hands. Sarah had returned at some point. Steam rose from the cup, making my eyes sting. I took a sip. It was so sweet, it was almost bitter, but the warmth slowly seeped back into my numb fingers. "You should sign it," I said, my breath fogging in the cool air. My mother's hand trembled like a dry twig, unable to pull the cap off the pen. Suddenly, Sarah reached out, twisted the cap off for her voice gentle but carrying a threat that was impossible to ignore. "Mom, sign it. If you don't, I will have this document scanned, notarized, and backed up. Then I'll send copies, along with the hospital's medical report, to Kevin's commanding officer in the Army, the town council, and that gossipy Aunt Carol of yours who loves to run her mouth. From now on, the two of you stay away from me and Ethan, or else." Sarah's face was grim. "I will literally make you disappear from this world." With my family out of the picture, Sarah and I fell into a life of pure passion. We couldn't get enough of each other. Soon, the news of a baby arrived like an unexpected spring shower, quietly seeping into every corner of our lives. The day she found out, I was feeding her a piece of sliced mango. She took a bite, then suddenly frowned and rushed to the bathroom. Gagging, I stood frozen, the piece of golden fruit still between my fingers. A moment later, she emerged, leaning against the doorframe, her eyes shining with something that was half tears, half laughter. "Ethan," she said softly, "I think we're pregnant." In that instant, it was like my entire world had been repainted in vibrant color. We held each other, feeling like two children who had found a piece of candy in the ruins. The next day, I went to the bookstore and bought a whole stack of books. What to expect when you're expecting, the Dad's Handbook. I filled the fridge with folic acid, organic milk, and wild-caught shrimp. Sarah sat on the sofa, barefoot, holding the ultrasound picture to her chest like it was a ticket to the future. "Ethan," she murmured in my neck that night, her voice soft enough to melt. "Let's pick a nickname for the baby." "How about Mango?" I suggested, kissing the top of her head. It was the mango that gave us the clue. "Okay, Little Mango it is," she laughed, tracing circles in my palm with her finger. We booked the best maternity hospital, got on the wait list for a VIP delivery room, and even hired a postpartum nurse 6 months in advance. The day we went to the county clerk's office for the birth registration, I wore the light blue shirt she'd bought me. She wore a loose, white maxi dress, her belly still flat, but she carried herself with a new, proud posture. We took a number, waited in line, took the photo, filled out the forms. It all felt like a fairy tale, a red carpet rolled out just for us. Until the clerk behind the window tapped a few keys on her keyboard, looked up, and glanced between the two of us. Her voice was as cold and detached as a judge reading a death sentence. "The system shows that you two finalized your divorce a month ago. You are not currently a legally married couple, so you are ineligible to file for a birth registration." A loud ringing filled my ears, as if someone had unplugged my brain. I heard my own parched voice ask, "There must be some mistake." The clerk turned the monitor towards us. The cold blue light made me squint. The official seal was bright red, like a smear of wet blood. I whipped my head around to look at Sarah. She stood perfectly still, her face so pale it was almost translucent. Her eyelashes were trembling violently, but her lips were pressed into a thin, hard line. "So, I reached for her, but my fingertips only brushed her wrist. It was as cold as a block of ice. She suddenly looked up and gave me a smile that was more painful than a sob. "Ethan, let's just go home, okay?" On the drive home, I navigated the car through a tunnel, our two silent silhouettes reflected in the window. I clutched the rejection notice, the paper growing soft and flimsy from the sweat on my palm. The moment we walked in the door, she went straight to the kitchen and turned her back to me. The sound of running water filled the apartment. I leaned against the doorframe, my voice so hoarse it didn't sound like my own. "It's okay. There's obviously been a mistake. We'll just get married again." She turned off the faucet. When she turned around, she was clutching a gleaming kitchen knife. This had pushed her over the edge. "I know who did it. I'm going to go take care of them right now." I knew I couldn't stop her, so I got into the passenger seat of her black G-Wagon. She slammed on the gas, the engine roaring like a beast, the tires screaming against the pavement. I gripped the seat belt, my knuckles white, my throat dry. "Sarah, let's just calm down for a second." "I am perfectly calm," she said, her voice terrifyingly serene, but a black storm was raging in her eyes. The car skidded to a halt in front of my mother's old apartment building. Of course, Sarah knew everything there was to know about me. The light was on in the 6th-floor apartment. The smell of stewing meat wafted from the window, mixed with the sound of my brother's obnoxious cackling. It felt like a dull saw scraping against my nerves. Sarah got out of the car, the hem of her trench coat whipping in the night wind. She charged ahead, her footsteps echoing as she took the stairs two at a time. By the time I reached the 6th floor, she had already reared back her leg. Boom! The heavy-duty security door shuttered, ripping a chunk of the wall out with the frame. The deadbolt flew across the living room and clattered to a stop right in front of my mother's slippers. The apartment fell silent. My mother was frozen, a barbecue rib still in her hand, sauce dripping onto the floor. My brother was cross-legged on the sofa, a TikTok video blaring from his phone. His laughter died in his throat, like a chicken being strangled. Sarah stepped over the mangled threshold, the heels of her boots clicking sharply on the tile floor. I followed close behind, my heart hammering in my chest, but I couldn't stop myself from whispering, "God, that's my wife." She glanced back at me, the corners of her eyes crinkling, but the smile didn't reach them. "Ethan, shut the door." I turned and dutifully propped the broken door back in place. It let out a metallic groan, as if it were wailing on my mother's behalf. My mother slammed the rib down in her bowl, trying to project an authority she didn't have. "Have you lost your mind? You." Sarah didn't give her the chance to finish. She reached out and smack. A single backhand sent my mother sprawling. Then she picked up the bowl of greasy stew and poured it over my mother's head. "Mom!" My brother started to get up, but Sarah flicked her foot. The ceramic bowl went flying and smashed against his knee. He let out a yelp and fell forward, his forehead cracking against the corner of the coffee table. A line of blood immediately welled up along his eyebrow. "Stay on your knees until I say you can get up," Sarah commanded. My mother, finally snapping out of her shock, grabbed a broom from behind the sofa and swung it like a club. Sarah sidestepped, caught the head of the broom, and shoved it back. Thump! The end of the wooden handle struck my mother squarely in the center of her chest. The air rushed out of her, her face turning a purplish blue as she stumbled back onto the sofa, unable to make a sound. "Why are you hitting us?" my brother whined, realizing he was no match for her. I knelt and shoved the birth registration rejection notice in his face. "This was you, wasn't it?" His face was half covered in blood, but he still tried to lie. "Bro, Mom was just trying to do what's best for you. That woman is dangerous. You have to divorce her." At the word divorce, Sarah's gaze dropped to absolute zero. "Say that again. I dare you." Before my brother could react, Sarah had picked up a shard of the broken bowl and drawn a red line across his cheek. The stench of urine suddenly filled the air around him. Sarah's expression remained placid, but I knew she meant every word she said. Anyone who tried to take me from her, she would actually kill. Soha, we were wrong. We're so sorry," my mother begged, kneeling on the floor, the stew and blood dripping from her hair. Her lips trembled. "We'll never interfere in your lives again. We swear." My brother was a mess of snot and tears, kneeling ramrod straight, too terrified to even wipe the blood dripping from his forehead. "Sis." "No, ma'am. He's all yours. I'll go out of state tomorrow and get a job. I'll never come back, I swear." Sarah stood over them, idly flipping the blood-stained porcelain shard between her fingers. Begging for forgiveness? She let out a soft laugh, her voice as gentle as if she were speaking to a child. "It's too late." She crouched down, pressing the sharp edge of the shard against Kevin's face, tracing a thin, bloody line along his jaw. "People like you need to be taught a lesson. You made Ethan suffer the public humiliation of being told he was divorced at the county clerk's office. And you think a simple, 'I'm sorry' erases that?" She twisted her wrist, pressing the shard just under his earlobe. A single drop of blood rolled down, bright as a ruby. "I'm going to make you remember," she whispered, "what consequences feel like." Then, Sarah smiled and looked back at me. "Honey, how about I cut off one of their ears and gouge out an eye? Would that be fair?" She was smiling, but I knew she was dead serious. Just as Kevin looked like he was about to pass out from fear, creak, the mangled security door was pulled open from the outside. A large figure filled the doorway, a thick gold chain glinting under the hallway light. Well, what's all this drama about? It was my cousin, Vince Rizzo, a well-known thug in our town. When we were kids, my brother used to team up with him to bully me, so Vince would leave him alone. I'd heard he did 3 years in prison for assault, and now made a living as a loan shark and bouncer. A nasty scar ran from his eyebrow to the corner of his mouth, making his smile look like a crawling centipede. A flicker of hope lit up my mother's eyes. "Vince, help me. This psycho is trying to kill us." Kevin looked at him like he was his savior. "Cousin, take her out. She's crazy." Vince chewed his gum, his eyes raking over Sarah's body. "So this is the little wife, huh?" He blew a bubble, and it popped, even hotter than in the pictures. He took 2 steps forward, reaching out to touch Sarah's face. Such nice skin. I've always liked. He never finished the sentence. Sarah flicked the porcelain shard in her hand. A deep gash opened on the back of Vince's hand. Droplets of blood spattered against the wall like ink. He froze for a second, looking from his hand to Sarah, and then a slow, ugly grin spread across his face, revealing teeth stained yellow from nicotine. Feisty. I like that even better. In the next instant, he pulled a switchblade from his back pocket. It snapped open, the point aimed at Sarah's chin. All right, give your big cousin a kiss, and I'll forget this ever happened. My brain went blank, like it had been struck by lightning. He was a dead man. Sarah didn't move. She just tilted her head slightly and glanced at me, a look that seemed to ask, "May I?" I swallowed hard and nodded. The moment she got my permission, she smiled. It was a sweet smile, but it was laced with madness. She tossed the shard to the floor, where it landed with a crisp clink. Then, before anyone could react, she lunged. Thud! A powerful knee strike folded Vince's 200-pound body in half. His gum shot out of his mouth in a spray of blood. As he doubled over, Sarah grabbed a handful of his hair, yanked his head down, and brought her other knee up. Crack! The sound of his nose breaking was as clean and sharp as snapping a carrot. She didn't stop. She jerked his head back by the hair, forcing him to look up, while her free hand snatched the pepper grinder from the dining table. Bam! Bam! BM! 3 solid hits right on his scarred face. Pepper mixed with blood and spittle, like throwing gasoline on a fire. Vince screamed and collapsed to his knees, the switchblade clattering to the floor. Sarah bent down, picked up the knife, and slammed it through the back of his hand, pinning it to the floorboards. Which hand was it that wanted to touch me? She asked softly, her tone perfectly even. Vince was howling in agony, but she just turned to me, her eyes curving into a beautiful, terrifying smile. Ethan, go get the meat cleaver from the kitchen. I'm going to make a special stew for your mother and brother tonight. My mother and Kevin were paralyzed with fear, slumped on the floor like 2 sacks of wet cement. The stench of urine grew stronger. I took a deep breath, walked into the kitchen, and reached for the knife block. Sister-in-law. Ma'am, I was wrong. I'm so sorry. Vince's massive frame was now a trembling mountain of flesh. He started slamming his forehead against the floor, right on top of the broken porcelain, smearing blood and pepper into a grotesque mask. I'm a pig. My hands are filth. I'm not even human. With every curse, he slapped himself across the face with his free hand, the sound sharp and echoing. Sarah crouched down, her elbow resting on her knee, watching with an appreciative air as the handle of the knife bobbed up and down with his frantic apologies. Admitting you were wrong, she mused, her voice like ice cubes tumbling in a glass. But you were wrong about so much more than that. Vince froze, his eyes wide with terror. Sarah's gaze shifted past him, landing on me. In that moment, my own eyes burned. All this time, she had remembered for me. When you were 8, she began, you cornered Ethan in the outhouse and made him lick the bottom of your shoe. Remember that. The color drained from Vince's face. When you were 10, you stuffed a dead rat in his backpack and told him you'd beat him every time you saw him if he snitched. With each transgression she listed, she tapped the back of his pinned hand with the spine of the knife, and fresh blood beaded up between his fingers. When you were 12, you pushed him into the septic tank and stood on the edge, throwing firecrackers in at him. She tilted her head, her smile revealing a hint of her canines. You really do deserve to die, don't you? I leaned against the doorframe, my knuckles white. All those putrid memories I thought I had buried, the ones that stank like sewage, she was dragging them all out into the light. Vince completely fell apart, snot and tears mixing with the blood on his face as he slammed his head against the floor. I'll pay. I'll give him money. I'll apologize. I'll be his slave for life. He scrambled toward me, his head hitting the floor 3 more times. Ethan, little brother. No, Grandpa. Just say the word. Tell me what to do to make it right, and I'll do it. The only sounds in the room were his ragged breathing and the dripping of blood. I opened my mouth, but my throat felt clogged with cotton. So this is what it feels like to have someone hold your grudges for you. Sarah stood up, took the meat cleaver from my hand, and tapped Vince on the shoulder with the flat of the blade. A slave? That's a shame. We only have an opening for a guard dog. She looked at me, her expression softening. Ethan, should we put a collar on him? Vince, as if grabbing a lifeline, crawled to my feet. He wanted to hug my legs, but didn't dare, so he just started slapping himself again. Woof, woof, woof. I'm a dog. I'll guard your house for the rest of my life, he sobbed, choking on his own words. I can bite people, too. Anyone ever messes with you again, I'll kill him. I looked down and saw the gash on the back of his hand, the black pepper ground into the wound. It looked just like the sand he had mixed into the food he'd once forced me to eat. Suddenly, I started to laugh. I laughed until my shoulders shook, until tears streamed down my face and landed on his blood-caked head. Okay, I heard myself say, my voice raspy and unfamiliar. You could be the dog. Sarah raised an eyebrow, surprised I would agree. I knelt, wiped some of the blood from his forehead with a napkin, and quietly added my condition. But first, we have to pull your teeth. For safety. Vince's pupils dilated in horror as a strangled whimper escaped his throat. Sarah stared for half a second, then burst out laughing. The sound was like a string of silver bells shattered by the wind, manic and sweet. Whatever my husband says. She flicked her wrist, the meat cleaver flashing in the light. Clack! A bloody molar rolled across the floor and stopped at my mother's feet. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she finally fainted. Sarah grabbed Vince by the collar and dragged him like a sack of garbage to the balcony. She took a dog leash, looped it around his neck, and tied the other end to the security bars on the window. Good boy. No barking before sunrise, she said, patting his swollen face. We'll get you your rabies shot tomorrow. The night wind swept through the apartment, clearing the stench of blood. My legs felt weak, and I leaned against the dining table for support. Sarah walked over, cupped my face in her hands, and stood on her toes to kiss my still trembling eyelashes. Ethan, she whispered, her voice low and soft. Feel better now? I looked at my own reflection in her eyes. The little boy who had been cornered in the bathroom, too scared to even cry, was finally being led out of the endless darkness. I nodded and shook my head. There's one more thing, I said, my gaze sweeping over my unconscious mother and the cowering form of my brother. They need to be the ones to tear up that divorce certificate. Sarah smiled, hooking a finger in my collar and pulling me closer. She whispered in my ear, her hot breath both gentle and dangerous. This time, if anyone dares to try and separate us again, I'll cut out their tongue. The next morning, before the fog had even lifted, the sound of sirens woke up the entire complex. Ethan Miller, Serafina Vance, you're under arrest for suspicion of aggravated assault. You're coming with us. As the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around my wrist, my mind went blank. There was only one thought. Sarah can't get in trouble. In the interrogation room, the fluorescent lights made the air feel like a freezer. I rushed to speak. It was all me. I did everything. My wife had nothing to do with it. The lead detective, a woman with tired eyes, looked up. You, by yourself, did that to 3 people? I was at a loss for words, but I doubled down. Yes, I've had training. I lost my temper. In the room next door, however, Sarah was unervingly calm. On the monitor, I could see her leaning back in her chair, tapping her fingers on the table as if keeping time to a song. Halfway through my statement, the door opened and my cousin and his family walked in. Officer, we want to drop the charges. Vince announced. It was all a misunderstanding. We lied about them. I couldn't understand. How could they completely change their story in just a few hours? Despite the police questioning them repeatedly, all 3 insisted they had filed a false report. They ended up getting a lecture from the cops themselves. At 3 in the afternoon, the iron gate of the holding cell slid open with a loud groan, and I was blinded by the sunlight. Sarah was waiting at the bottom of the steps. She stood on her toes to shield my eyes from the glare, her voice as light as a feather. Let's go home, husband. In the car, I couldn't hold it in any longer. So, how on earth did you do that? I glanced at her in the driver's seat. She was steering with one hand, her fingernails a healthy pink. You'd never guess she'd spent the previous night beating someone with the back of a knife. Honey, I drew out the word. Are you keeping secret from me now? A small smile played on her lips, but she didn't answer. I sighed, mimicking the threatening tone she often used. If you don't tell me, I'll be forced to what? She glanced at me, a playful glint in her eyes. Bite me? No. I leaned in close, whispering into her ear. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight. The steering wheel jerked, and the car bumped over a speed bump. Ethan, you've learned how to play dirty, she said, biting her lower lip. She pulled the car over under the shade of a sycamore tree and killed the engine. You really want to know? I nodded, placing my hands on my knees like an obedient schoolboy. She watched me for a few seconds, then reached into the console and pulled out a thick file folder. Okay, but you have to promise not to be scared of me after you hear this. The only thing that scares me is you not being by my side. She let out a soft laugh and opened the file. My eyes went wide. It was filled with page after page of blackmail material, all of my family's darkest secrets. Now, I finally understood why they had been so quick to drop the charges. Sarah's voice was low and flat. I spent 1.5 years collecting all of this. My throat was dry. You were investigating them all this time. No, I was investigating everyone who could possibly hurt you. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Everyone has secrets they don't want anyone to know, she said, tapping the folder. If they dare to hurt you, I will make them pay for it, with interest. I thought about Vince and my family, their faces bruised and swollen, tripping over themselves to change their story. A chill went down my spine, but it was followed by a rush of adrenaline. So at the police station, the way they fell all over themselves to apologize. It was because of this. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating flecks of gold on her eyelashes. I reached out and cupped her face, studying her intently. What are you doing? She asked, a rare hint of bashfulness in her voice. Just trying to see what an angel looks like up close. Oh, stop. I'm serious, I said, leaning in to kiss the tip of her nose. Sarah, what did I ever do to deserve you watching over me for all these years? The tips of her ears turned red, but she put on a fierce act. Keep flattering me, and I'll leak all of your secrets next. I don't have any secrets. Oh. She swiped open another folder on her phone. On the screen was a screenshot of an old Facebook post of mine from high school. Sarah smiled at me today. I was so happy I jumped up and down 10 times. I really want her to be my wife someday. Beneath the text was a grainy, pixelated photo I had secretly taken of her profile. I died of embarrassment on the spot. Mr. Miller, she began to read in a dramatic, slow voice. Sarah's smile is like strawberry Sprite, the kind that fizzes with sweetness. Who wrote this, I wonder? I slapped my hand over her phone, my face burning red all the way down to my neck. Have some mercy. Let your husband keep a little dignity. She doubled over with laughter, poking me in the chest. Don't worry. All of your embarrassing old posts are protected by 10 layers of encryption. Only I, your wife, have access to them anytime I want. I sighed in defeat, but I couldn't help but smile with her. Outside, the autumn wind sent leaves spiraling across the windshield. I took her hand in mine, our fingers intertwining. So, marry me again. Of course.